Welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Jonny.
And I'm Phil.
And in today's episode, we're talking about the FAQ that just dropped. And then we're going to talk about our experiences at Beachhead. So, action-packed episode, this one.
So should we just jump in, Jonny, straight with the FAQ?
I think that's wise because there's quite a lot of big changes that have dropped, I would say. In fact, not huge in number, but I'd say huge in impact. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that is definitely fair to say. Yeah, and some some really good clarifications as well. I will add that at this point. Like they've definitely taken on board obviously the feedback they've been receiving and clarified some, not all, but some of the things, a lot of the things, which in our view definitely needed some clarification and tidying up.
Oh, absolutely. And for anyone who is page counting, we're at 7 pages of FAQ so far and Errata. And sneakily, we've got an extra 2 pages of Germany. So I guess we're at 9 pages technically. But will we start with the rulebook FAQ?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go through them in order of appearance or in order of, I guess, importance?
Well, I don't actually know which ones are new because they haven't color coded them.
That was going to be one of my first things I was going to say that. I loved the color coding. And admittedly, though, the previous FAQ wasn't huge. So I think most of it is pretty new.
Yeah, if I pull up the old and the new, I can then be informed when I say which one is new and which one is old.
Yeah. I mean, the
Here we
first
go.
one, measure range and open fire, you can now hold back fire with one shot and flamethrowers. That's always been the case, but it's a nice clarification.
Actually, that is worth pointing out because in the actual rulebook where it said it doesn't specify what weapons you can hold back, and there was a little cheeky workaround whereby, because obviously you determine cover based on your shooters. Now, if you've got a squad of say 12 and 7 of them are shooting in a position which would give cover to the target, you could say, do you know what? I'm going to hold back shots from those 7, and only 5 are going to fire because it won't give cover, even though I'm rolling fewer dice. That is actually a really nice clarification. Because certainly in the early days of V3, I was seeing people, and indeed I was one of those people questioning this and going, well, technically I can do this.
Yeah. And it's nice not to have to shoot your flamethrower when you know you're out of range. And I do like that little strategic choice. Am I within the 6? Ooh. But is that a new one for this FAQ?
It is a new one, yes, yeah.
Lovely. I think we should skip the next one
Yes.
and jump straight to multi-launchers, if that's all right.
Yes, the errata of the errata.
Do you want to tell everyone what it says?
Yeah, so the new errata, delete the old errata, do not play the first errata. So you change the first paragraph of the second sentence on page 102 under multi-launchers to the following. So it fires as a heavy mortar. That is a word change because it used to say counts as. So it fires as a heavy mortar, but its chance of hitting never gets any better than 6, so you can't range in. That's the same as we used to. And its minimum range is increased to 36 inches.
Well, I recognize that from somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's a good fix. So obviously with the English Open, we treated it as a light howitzer, didn't we?
Yep, exactly.
In terms of range and also pins and HE template. This is simply just increasing the range to 36. So no longer lobbing, long distance rockets over 12 inches. Now, you replace the previous errata, so spotters are back on for multi-launchers.
They are. And we're down to 1 pin per turn rather than D3.
Rather than D3, yeah.
And then jumping on that, because spotters are back on the menu, as it were, what they've done, because clearly we've decided that that isn't enough of a nerf for multi-launchers, people are still going to complain. So rather than saying they can't use spotters, what we've done is we've made spotters bad for everyone, which is a bit like what happened with machine guns. People won't play machine guns, because they can be sniped. Oh, I've got a fix. We'll make snipers bad rather than make machine guns good. And I've got to say, when we get to Beachhead Reflections, what we'll see is that it didn't really make machine guns good, and it just made snipers bad. We've got a similar thing happening here where basically, well, do you want to read it as it's written?
Yeah, so the spotters, page 102, first paragraph, you add the following. They do have the infiltrator special rule, so that's a nice clarification. And secondly, this is the key bit. We changed the first sentence as follows. So the crew are assumed to be able to see whatever any spotter or forward observer in your force can see. That's great. Note, however, that a spotter or observer can only spot for a single indirect fire weapon per game turn. If the firing unit switches to a different spotter in the following turn, this resets the ranging in process, just as if the unit had moved.
Yeah.
So only one indirect firing unit per spotter / observer per turn.
Yeah. And this is, from my perspective, this is so frustrating. There's so many things wrong with this. And there's so many other ways we could have nerfed the multi-launchers without doing this. So like the big problem with this, as I said already, is you're making something bad that isn't the thing you're trying to make bad. You're trying to fix problem A by changing B.
Yeah.
The other thing as well is that rule was brilliant. Like that gave the forward artillery observers, forward air observers, we were starting to see them roll out because they had sort of like diversity of role. They had benefit beyond their benefit.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just a case of you called in your artillery strike once or twice, and then they were just a little 1 or 2 man unit. They could still spot for indirect fire weapons. Yes, that's a fair point. Yeah,
Yeah, and then we've got the fact that this is actually a huge mechanics change because, like, and we've seen posts about this, and then people are sort of in two minds about it in the replies to the posts. But ultimately, we've released a core mechanic that does affect the way people are building armies. Like people
yeah.
saw this and they were like, "Oh, brilliant! I'm going to take 25 pounders. I'm going to take 4 of them, so I'm going to go put them in my shopping cart. Oh, and then I'll take mortars so I can have the spotters for the 25 pounders. Let's put 3 mortars in my shopping cart." People have gone out and bought like let's say £100 worth of models, and then the reason they've built that army has been removed within months of the game being released. And it's very sort of like 40k-esque, where there was a time when I used to play 40k and I never used to lean too hard into something that was too good because I always knew that it was time limited. Like there was always armies that I wanted to build.
Yeah.
And if I was going to build them, I knew that I've got a shelf life of 6 months on this. So if I'm going to build it, I need to do it now. I need to choose the tournaments I'm going to take it to, knowing that by Christmas it'll be over. Bolt action hasn't historically been like that, and people like the fact that it hasn't been like that. So if we're going to that model of gaming where we're going to just be changing core mechanics left, right, and center, I really worry that it's going to like diminish sales basically because people are always going to be hesitant to lean too heavily into a new build.
Yeah, no, that is a fair point. And if I was, somebody who would, like you said, gone out and spent a lot of money, and not because I'm trying to game it, and I've seen some comments online on the Facebook group where someone has validly said this in terms of, well, I've invested X hundreds of pounds or whatever, and hours and time and resource into this build. Now can't play it. Some people have jumped up and gone, well, you shouldn't have been a whacker in the first place. And like, I don't think taking multiple HE weapons with spotters was a whacker thing to do necessarily.
100%.
I do get that. Yeah, I do get that, especially because what we're in February now, so we're in 5 months. 5 months into the release. I understand that completely. Yeah. That said, and I said this when we did the very first episode on B3, I didn't like the fact that there was a blanket rule that any indirect firing weapon could utilize a spotter, because immediately I was thinking of knee mortars in Japanese squads, VB launches in some of the Belgian, French squads, etc. That makes no sense to me because they never would have operated on a radio network with a spotter. And then you start getting into, well, okay, let's imagine this radio network. Now, is that spotter assigned to the artillery platoon, okay, or the heavy weapons platoon, but he's actually also calling in indirect fire for a priest, which is on a different radio network because it's part of an armored platoon. Now, I know bolt action is Hollywood rather than, real life, historical, blah, 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 etc. But I didn't like the original wording and the implications, but I agree that people could feel bad with this.
Yeah. And I think from on the other side of the coin, because I don't like to just complain without sort of given potential resolution, there are so many ways we could have done this differently, like hundreds of ways. Let's say we didn't want to change the core mechanics at all. We could have just made multi-launchers 2-inch templates. They still get to use the spotters, but they're 2-inch templates. They're nerfed. They're still worth taking potentially, but they're not an auto-include anymore. Problem solved. We keep the core mechanics intact. If we did want to change the core mechanics and make it slightly more thematic, what you were saying there, absolutely solves it because you say, okay, you can spot for the platoon you were bought for, which
Yeah.
fits your radio network narrative. Very thematic solve. It means your multi-launchers basically you're going to have to buy another big artillery piece because you're looking at least a medium
Which
howitzer.
because which it needs to take a mortar, a spotter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole like, well, but where does the FAO sit in? Like,
Yeah, well, with
he's
him,
yeah.
that's where, even with my thematic radio networks rule,
Mm.
I'm gonna, because I'm paying so many points for him, I'm gonna give him the opportunity to still spot for any platoon. But perhaps what I would say is, because he's changing his frequencies, he can only spot for one platoon per turn.
Okay, so
Now,
platoon rather than unit. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
he can, because the other problem with this units rule, which actually I've moved on to solutions before I've defined all of the problems. The
Yeah.
other problem with this is like the reason it's bad game writing is it creates exactly the scenario you don't want in a game, which is lots of things to track.
It's
And
housekeeping. Yeah.
yeah, and I can't remember, someone did comment, like did a post about this, and I can't remember who it was. So drop in the
Yeah.
comments if it was you, and you deserve credit. But basically, we now have to track who the spotter belongs to in terms of who he was bought for, because if that gets destroyed, it's removed. I
Yeah.
have to track who he spotted for this turn,
Yeah.
and then I have to carry that through to the next turn,
So the ranging in. Yeah.
the ranging in, and then if I swap, I have to track that. There's like three things I now have to track. Because also I'm also tracking the ranging in value on that mortar on that target.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not the end of the world, but it is
No.
100% going to be forgotten at some point. It's going to cause an argument at some point because you'll be at a tournament and someone will have used that spotter for that and they'll forget. And then with the first dice of the turn, they've done that. With the last dice of the turn, they try to use the spotter again. And because they forgot to put their marker down, they're certain they didn't use that spotter already. And you're certain they did. And then how do
Yeah.
you resolve that? Because you can't go back in time. Like, unless we start recording games, you can't do a live action replay. Like,
Yeah. So I saw posts along those lines, and I replied. So I've always built, not always, that's not true. Once I started going to tournaments and I realized it was important, I have built my spotters and the parent unit, so going back to V2, with the same color tuft, for
mhm,
example. So I match up tuft to tuft. So I know that spotter belongs to that mortar or that howitzer. So when the howitzer dies, I take off the corresponding spotter with the tuft. So that's the first fix, as it were. What I then started doing was having two dice of the same color and a different color per ranging in unit. So if I had five
exactly.
mortars in my
Yep.
army, I had red, yellow, green, blue, white, for example, two sets of dice. One goes on my unit, one goes on the target unit. All I need to do now, I say all, is get a third dice of the same color and put that onto the spotter that I am using for my unit, ranging in on my enemy's unit. Yes, I've had to think about it, and it took me probably 9 months of going to tournaments and events and working out I need to track this better because not just for me, but for my opponent as well. And I'm going to come back to this point when we talk about fins and comsomolets and beachhead and tracking units in transports because it's a similar issue. I don't think it's insurmountable, but I think if you're just entering the game and you're really excited, you've just bought a 30 man infantry box or the starter set and you build it and you don't think about the implications of the game mechanics, you can end up making funny builds because you put the units together in a certain way and you're like, I really now need to go back and rebuild another spotter, or I need to find a way of painting that spotter so I know it relates to that unit and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And that was my reflection as well, that I'm going to get myself a third dice of a matching color. And then if I do use spotters, the third dice will go next to the spotter that was
The
used.
spotter that's being used, yeah.
Yeah, and I've always done exactly the same as you. I've got with my French, I've got the spotters with the little telephones, and
Yep.
I basically paint the telephone to match the card suit that's on the gun, like
Yeah.
because they do the blue and the red decals, and then you can have black as well. Now, and so, but you still have that issue of what if someone forgets to put that marker down, and it's like I just like one of the big things was let's keep it simple. Like simplify the addition, keep it smooth. And this is the opposite of that. And as I said, there's so many fixes. We could make multi-launchers 2-inch templates. We could just say multi-launchers don't use spotters. We could say spotters can only spot for their own platoon. Like there's so many other ways we could have fixed this. And it just feels like we've chosen the worst possible option here. uh, and yeah, it just I don't know if there's much else to say on it other than it doesn't leave me feeling very confident about V3 generally. Off the
Okay.
back of like an errata-filled Germany book, where we
Yeah,
had
yeah,
lots of
yeah.
errors slipping through,
Yeah.
it's not making me feel awfully confident about V3 as a whole. Which, to be fair, I've been given a benefit of the doubt so far, and
Yeah.
I've been leaning in because I want it to be a fun game, and it has been fun. I've been enjoying playing it. But if we're going to go back to this, has a stench of tiger fear. This is my big concern. Do you remember?
No, because I didn't play at the start of V2, so I
Yeah,
I wasn't I
but
wasn't
you were
privy
here
to
for the
the Tiger Fear.
FAQs,
I was here for the FAQs. Yes,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the stench because I didn't mind original tiger fear. They wrote a bad rule,
yeah.
but then they got into their minds that it was overpowered. It actually wasn't overpowered. People
No,
weren't running Panzer fours very often. It was forgotten often, which is
yeah,
what made it a bad rule, a bit like turret jam. But it wasn't overpowered. And then they got into their minds they had to fix Tiger Fear and released a series of terrible new versions of Tiger Fear that people still didn't like, that didn't really fix the issue. Um, and this has a bit of a stench of that we're just sort of like throwing anything at it without stopping, giving it serious thought, and coming up with something that's either thematic or very good from a games mechanics perspective.
okay. We'll see. Yeah, what I will say though, I'm gonna put the positive hat on here. I understand, what people are saying, including yourself, that oh, we're only 5 months in and we're seeing all these erratas. That to me suggests that they're now listening. So whatever was going on previously with regards to putting the rule book together and so on, which meant that there were erratas from day one, at least now they are addressing it. That's a positive in my view.
Yeah. Yeah. But a bit more thought, please, is my my request. Make spotters great again.
Okay. Oh, actually, I was going to say this. You said a minute ago that you felt that we were starting to see observers because they had a role, and that maybe they would less so now. I've gone the other way. I've planned lists for 3 events coming up, and for 2 of them, I'm taking observers, and I'm using those observers and saving my 10 points for the spotter that I probably would have taken actually beforehand. Because previously I was like, I want to just saturate the board with spotters. If I'm taking HE, I want to know that I've got every angle covered. Now I'm like, okay, I can only use 1, so I'm only going to take effectively 1 per unit. 2 of them might be spotters and 2 of them might be observers. So I'm actually starting to use, well, planning to use, I haven't used them yet, but planning to use observers more.
That's interesting because I've gone completely the other way. Because when we talk about Beachhead, we'll see I had 4 heavy
Mm,
mortars in, and
yes,
I
you
took
did.
2 spotters for them
Yeah.
because I felt I didn't need all 4. I needed more than 1. But because we had so many points to play with, I genuinely considered putting an observer
Yeah.
in place of one of those spotters because he could spot for the whole platoon. Since this has dropped, that has gone completely from my mind, to be honest. Even running HE now, I'm starting to think it's a bit fiddly. Because
Mm,
also, the other thing that's really fiddly now, the thing that I really liked is your spotter, you set your spotter up and your guns can see from him. Now I'm having to think, well, which spotter's going to use which gun because I need
yes.
to optimize my lines of sight. And yes, it's extra agency, so you could argue it's like an extra fun element to think about. I don't think it's a particularly fun thing to be thinking about. And so I quite like the fun of just you get your spotters in a few positions, and if you lose the one in the key position, that's bad. But otherwise, I'm not having to think each turn like, oh, I'll use him for him and etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of fun, let's move on. um,
Snap 2, cannot use in first wave. We couldn't use
yeah.
HQ stuff in reserve, so we already knew that, but it's a nice clarifier.
Yeah. Now the next one, I'm really, 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 really pleased with this because the first time I read it and the first time I played it, I was like, I can do this. And my opponent, when I played my first game, they did this, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So in the original rulebook wording, the wording was for crew and artillery units that each crew member had to be within 1 inch of the gun. Nothing about the relationship between crew members.
Yep.
Okay, so what it meant was you could starfish your crew around your artillery piece, and my opponent did this in the first game he played against me. Quite right, like no issue there. hits it with a mortar, and I was like, oh, I can only hit one bloke because the gun is so big that you just spread them out so far. So now it's 1 inch with each other. Sorry, I'll re-say that. They are arranged in formation as described for infantry units, i.e., they must be no more than an inch away from each of the crew members and within 1 inch of any part of the gun model. So it does stop the whole starfishing, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I was struck by this as well. I got a heavy mortar shot on an Ebelwerfer, and one man couldn't be clipped, and so the one man survived and sort of toddled off next turn on his own behind a hill to try and preserve his dice. Yeah, I think it's a good change. I don't know. I think I'm going to have to try it with some big guns like an 88 where you've got a ton of crew, because I do worry it's going to get a bit crowded. And the old, I think it was 2 inch in V2.
Within 2 inch of the breach. So
Yeah,
but that got crowded. If you had an 88, that got crowded.
yeah, it did. It did. It's the 1 inch of the gun, and I wonder if what would have been better off with is like 4 inches of the breach with incoherency. So a 4 inch template's always going to get them, but you've got a little bit more movement for avoiding 2 inch template blasts.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we'll see. It requires like a bit of testing before I have a solid opinion on that one, but it does seem a shift in the right direction.
Yep. Next up, artillery and shooting line of sight. It's just clarified that you can draw a line of sight to either the gun or the crew. It wasn't the case that it was clear previously that it was either the gun or the crew. I think it just referred to models, and then there was a question of, well, is the gun a model? Well, technically it is, and
100%.
all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then range is measured to the gun.
Yes, always has been. Yep.
Yeah, so if the crewmen are in front of it,
doesn't matter.
You could be out of range to shoot them.
Yeah, you can see them, but you can't shoot. So range has always been measured to the gun. Yeah, to the breech, the center of the gun.
Like we could just say to any model in there, like measure the range from
the breech. Yeah,
from the breech, from the center of the gun, however you want to define it.
But measure to any model that is arranged in coherency, as just mentioned.
Yeah, well, any model in the unit, because there might be out of coherency by mistake, like from losing wounds,
losing bullets. Yeah, true. Cool.
But moving forward to vehicles.
Yeah, this is a good one. Vehicles and orders. So it's clarified that when you fail an order, you reverse the full amount possible on a failed order. It just said previously they reverse. Little bit of chat about this because, and this is not the errata, this is essentially the rulebook.
Yep.
This sentence says you reverse backwards. I'm like, cool, you reverse backwards. Unless you read on 2 more sentences, you can just read that and go, I just moved backwards. But actually what it says 2 sentences later is, if you can't move straight backwards because of intervening obstacles or models, you must maneuver. So effectively, you must go back as far as you possibly can, and you must maneuver around if you can't go straight back.
Yeah, I've got to admit I was a bit frustrated here because at first pass, like you, I was really happy with this. I was like, oh, brilliant. We've got rid of that weird reversing round stuff because that's contentious because let's say you've got an obstacle that you're centered on, you reverse back to it, but if I pivot one way, I end up off the table. But if I pivot the other way, I stay on the table.
Yeah.
Which way am I pivoting here? And that's a problem because both are equally valid pivots that get you equally far from the enemy, but one removes the unit from the table. And so I thought, when I first read this, I thought this was replacing the entire thing that said, don't pivot, but do pivot, with just don't pivot, go back. I'm annoyed that they didn't get rid of that pivot thing around obstacles.
Yeah, so I've always played it from day one as you reverse back as far as you can. Appreciate that wasn't specified, but I was like, that's the intent. That's how I'm playing it. And the way I've got around your point is before I move it back, I measure the furthest distance back from where my model is and go, that is the furthest point in a straight backwards direction. That's a rubbish sentence. That's the furthest point straight backwards. I need to aim for that point. So that determines which way around I go if I have to maneuver around obstacles and so on. That's me. That's me making it up rather than it being specified and written in the rules and the errata and so on.
Yeah, and that makes sense. But the problem, as I said, is if both paths give you an equal distance backwards because there's another tank of the same type behind you and you're in a straight column, then there's not a clear way to go, if you see what I mean, because both are going to get you equally far back, and that's where the grey area is.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, so if on a straight line, ignoring the terrain, yeah, and just going, if I was to reverse straight backwards, where would I end up? That point in terms of X and Y coordinates, that's what I'm aiming for. Now, the problem would occur that you just said is when you can't get to that point in either way, because that's in the middle of an impassable terrain piece or another model or whatever it is. Yeah, that does need a bit of clarifying, but
I
work it
think we
out.
just get rid of the pivots. That's the maneuver. Just get rid of the pivots. It's
So
fine.
straight backwards as far as you can until you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
super simple. There's never going to be an argument about that because you can either go straight backwards or you can't. There's no which way are you pivoting kind of vibe. Because then, of course, you get that scenario where in a game someone might start their reverse and then they get to the pivot and they move pivot one way and you say, wait a minute, I think you should pivot it the other way. But now the tank isn't where it was and you can't do your measurement anymore. And then you have to kind of like, I don't know, we'll roll for it. And so I just like to keep it simple so we never get into those scenarios.
Yeah.
So shall we pivot onto the next new FAQ?
Yeah. So the next new entry is about platoon command vehicles. I thought this was clear, but it turns out it's not because it's been going on the last couple of days, and I've joined in online with this. So page 88, armored platoon command vehicle. Change the sentence in the first box as follows. This must be a vehicle that has the command vehicle special rule, or that has been given this rule from its its entries options. If you don't have one such vehicle in this armored platoon, you can give the command vehicle rule to any vehicle from the categories listed above for plus 10 points. In addition, if a vehicle in the transports and tows category of an army list has the command vehicle by default in its entry, or the option to take it, it can be used as the mandatory platoon command vehicle. Of course, you need to give it the command vehicle rule if that's an option.
Right. Now, can we jump to the FAQ from the errata here?
Mm-hmm.
Because the wording of that, to me, doesn't match the wording of the FAQ here.
Okay. Do you want to say how you so ignore the wording, ignore the FAQ.
So before we get to the FAQ, the sentence that says, if you don't have one such vehicle, you can give the command vehicle rule.
Yes.
Reads to me that in order to give command vehicle to a vehicle, I have to not already have one in the platoon. Because basically the condition that needs to be fulfilled in order for me to give command vehicle is that there isn't already one.
Yes.
That's how that sentence reads to me.
Okay, yeah.
And is that what the FAQ question answer says?
That's the query. That's what people have been discussing in the last couple of days. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's an actual FAQ answer here, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there's two. So there's two things. I'm just trying to find it here. Yeah. Okay. So there are two entries in the FAQ which relate to this. So the first question, can I take a vehicle that does not have command vehicle and upgrade it to make it platoon commander if I do have a vehicle which already starts with command vehicle available? Yes, you can.
And so that goes against the reading of the rule that says if you don't have one, you can add one. Like the way that I read that sentence, doesn't it?
Yeah,
that's
basically
the reverse of that.
Effectively, what that says is if I have a vehicle that doesn't have it, can I make it a platoon commander, even if I do have a vehicle which starts with command vehicle available? What that's saying is yes, you can. You can ignore a vehicle that has built-in command vehicle in order to add it to a different model. That's what that answer says to me.
Yeah, which is the opposite of
and then the next bit on the FAQ further down, can I have more than one vehicle with the command vehicle rule in the same armored platoon? So can I have multiple vehicles with command vehicle special rule? Yes, you can. You can add as many vehicles in the same armored platoon. One of them will be a mandatory platoon command vehicle. Note that this does not mean you can give the command vehicle to several vehicles if your armored platoon does not include any vehicle with the command vehicle rule in its entry, but just to one of them in order to fulfill the mandatory slot.
And again, that wording goes against the thing because the wording is if you don't have one, you can give it to any vehicle for 10 points.
Yeah, but then what that's saying is but
only
you can
one.
only once. Yeah.
I feel like what's happened here is they've written a rule that doesn't say what they think it says. And they're FAQing it. Either that or the rule did say what they think it said, but now they've forgotten what they thought it said, and they now think it says something different. Because that the way they've written it originally doesn't read the way that they've said it reads.
Yeah. So
Like
how do
that's
you
not.
understand? Go on. How ignore it, without
Yeah.
quoting from the text? How do you understand how I make a vehicle, a command vehicle in an armored platoon?
So my understanding from like reading the rules, obviously,
Yeah.
is if you take your 5 vehicles, let's say, to make a vehicle platoon, if none of them have command vehicle, you can pay
Yeah.
10 points to give any of them command vehicle to
Yeah.
become your commander. Now, that becomes the commander. Whether you can have more than one is wording specific because it does say any vehicle, but then it does say it's the mandatory.
Mm.
No, it doesn't actually. It says if a vehicle in the transports and tows category has command, it can be used as the mandatory. Sorry, it doesn't say that the one with command vehicle has to be the commander. And so the original wording to me says that if you don't have a command vehicle, any of them can have command vehicle for 10 points. And that can be up
Yeah.
to 5 if you want, and then you just pick one of them to be the commander. However, I think realistically, you give it to one and it becomes the commander. However, counter to that, if you already have one with command vehicle, you can't do that because you don't need to. It's how I
Yeah.
originally read it, and it's how the wording reads to me. But I don't know, is that how it reads to you?
I've gone over this, to be honest, quite a few times in the last week or so. um, and I've asked Marcus and others about this. When I first read it originally, but way back, it was like if I put a vehicle in the armored platoon that has command vehicle, that is my command vehicle. That's how I assumed it was the case. And I was like, oh, that sucks though, because actually I want to put it on a different vehicle that doesn't have the command vehicle built in, nor does it have the option, because I want to make this other vehicle. Let's say it's a US GMC M16. Yeah, I want to make that my command vehicle because it's open top, so it's going to take pins, and making it a command vehicle is going to make it easier to shed the pins and pass all the tests. But if I've got a US vehicle that has command vehicle built into it already, and I put that into my platoon, that needs to be my command vehicle. Now, I'm pretty sure that I've definitely been told or heard at some point that I don't need to do that. I can choose to make my M16 the command vehicle, even if I've got a vehicle which has the command vehicle special rule in my platoon already. What I
Yeah.
definitely can't do, and I agree with this one, is take 5 GMC M16s and make them all command vehicles.
But
Can only
equally,
do that once.
I don't think the wording stops you doing that. The wording
Okay.
of the rule says any vehicle.
No, but the FAQ answer, which says, oh, this is the can I have more than one vehicle with a command vehicle rule, says if you make something a command vehicle that isn't by default a command vehicle or with the option, you can only do it once. So
Yeah,
that
no,
rules
and
out
I agree.
that rules out that bit.
That's what the FAQ says. But what I'm saying is, as you were
But the
talking about
actual
your original reading of the rule,
mm,
the original reading of the rule never gave a limit on how many could be command vehicle. Now, I interpret it as the intention is you have one,
mm,
but actually, wording of this, even in the errata version there, I think if it wasn't for that FAQ answer, you could have had 5 command vehicles all rolling on the table. Um,
okay, so it's the line in a sentence that says you can give the command vehicle rule to any vehicle from the categories listed above for 10 points. I guess if it said to any and only one of the vehicles listed above.
exactly.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What's funny actually is it's more obvious in the page they're referencing. So the page they're referencing is the Armored Platoon page 188.
Yeah, it's this full
And
selection bit, isn't
this
it?
rule is under the Platoon Command Vehicle section.
Mm-hmm.
And so only one vehicle can be the Platoon Command Vehicle.
Singular, yeah.
And then it says this, and then in that box for the Platoon Command Vehicle, it says this must be a vehicle that has Command Vehicle, or if it doesn't have it, it can be given it for 10 points.
Okay.
And so I actually think their errata wording has made it more unclear and just cut the errata wording, stick the FAQs in,
Yeah.
super clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and actually, funnily, yeah, it says it must be a vehicle that has the command vehicle. Oh, no, actually, the original wording to me also says that you could have a command vehicle not in the platoon command vehicle slot and have a different vehicle in the command vehicle slot and give it platoon command, command vehicle.
Yeah, that's what I basically
Yeah,
was. That's what I was doing.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
how that read. So,
yeah, yeah.
and so just to clarify, because now the rules are super plumb and wonky, the the FAQ's generating more queues, to be honest, or at least more confusion in my mind. So to clarify where we're now at from the FAQs, forget the errata because that's nonsense. If I have a command vehicle by default, it has to be in the command slot.
Well, no,
The opposite,
because
sorry. The opposite. I've gotten us all twisted in circles because we've got two different answers in the same FAQ.
so page 4 of the FAQ. Can I take a vehicle that does not have command vehicle and upgrade it to make a platoon commander if I do have a vehicle which already starts a command vehicle available? Yes, you can.
So that's as per the rulebook. That's good. So if we just ignore the errata,
Yeah,
I won't get confused. I ignore the errata. I read the FAQ answer, combine that with command vehicle as per the rulebook.
yeah.
It's super obvious. You can put a command vehicle in any slot. You can put any vehicle in any slot. But if you happen to put one without command vehicle in the command slot,
You got to pay for it. Yeah, yeah. And
perfect,
then
easy.
the second one says I can have more than one vehicle with the command vehicle in the armor platoon. Yes, you can. Yeah, yeah. So this would be so if you took let's take Germans for example. You take is it the 25110, which is the big half track with the anti tank gun on it, which
Yeah,
is a transport vehicle. It's in the transport section, but it has a command vehicle special rule because it was used historically as the platoon commander's vehicle. You can take 4 of them as your non-compulsory, or three is your non-compulsory, 1 is your compulsory, and then let's say you take a Panzer III and make that your command vehicle.
yeah.
I understand that to be fine, and actually that's beneficial because you're getting little bubbles, 12-inch bubbles of command vehicle bonus.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good. Like that's what when you were saying that, I was thinking put the Warble. I'd take a Whirlwind in command for the same
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
you're talking about. Open top
Negating pins.
tanks,
Yeah.
drop the pin quite easily. Well, that's
Woof.
so basically put your command vehicles wherever you want. Put your vehicles wherever you want in slots, but whichever one you want to be the command vehicle, pay the 10 points if you need to.
Yeah.
Done. Easy.
Now we're gonna just like push through the rest. To be honest, most of it is already there. It's little erratas. I will flag the M51, which is the US quad AA artillery piece, which has been nerfed and is now counted as a vehicle, and therefore you're halving the number of shots. So it's still the same points, like 125 points or something. It can't be moved on its own because it it's a heavy gun or whatever. It's got the cumbersome rule basically.
New rule, that isn't it? I don't think that existed before, did it?
I think it might be in Armies of Germany. It might have appeared at that point. The thing I'm because I own this model, the thing I'm disappointed about is that it now has halved its shots. Yes, it had 24 shots, and yes, it did shut down an entire lane of the board, but you just hit it with indirect fire that you ranged in on, and it's gone. Like,
I am super confused here.
okay,
Counts as a vehicle
it's
mounted. Oh,
it's an
so it's
art.
not counted as a vehicle, it's counted as vehicle mounted machine guns.
It's an artillery piece that is being treated as a vehicle when it comes to the number of shots it has. Yeah,
But yeah, that is nonsense, man.
yeah.
Because it's only got.
It's got 24.
Yeah,
It's
that
not
is quite a lot
only.
of
It's
shots,
got
actually.
24, but it's static, and therefore, if you want to move it, you've got to spend a turn limbering it up and then moving it and so on. So initially, when it came out, people were like, "Oh, this is amazing! I'm going to buy 3 of them and just rinse my opponent."
Oh.
Well, not if your opponent's got spotters who don't get shot by it, and you start ranging in and you hit it because it goes fairly easily.
And it also goes back to you've just hit the point that I hit earlier, which is that if someone's gone out and bought 4 of these,
Mm.
they're now going to be pretty cross about the whole affair, aren't they?
I mean, I only bought 1, but that was in the summer when we saw the rules, and I was like, that's cool. It fits my Marines. I'll take that. I didn't buy 3 or 4, but if I did, I'd be a bit frustrated on that
And I
one.
mean, the other thing here is you're not changing the points. So I'm paying
No.
125 points for this fella. Now, for 10 points less, I could treat myself to a half track with the same weapons on it. So for 125, I can have the, what is it, the
M16.
M16 GMC?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's a lot less squishy because I don't have men who can be
yeah. It's armored. Yeah,
rifle fired. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
why on earth would I, and especially now V2, you could argue, but it fits in the artillery. Slots don't matter anymore. You can take whatever you want, as many as you want. Like
Yeah,
it costs me what? Let's say I take. Let's not even use shirkers. Let's just take inexperienced riflemen.
yeah,
It
yeah.
costs me 91 points to add a second vehicle platoon by taking an inexperienced rifle platoon.
Yes, yes, yeah, 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 yeah.
Which slot stuff's in is irrelevant, and
Mhm.
so that should be maximum 125 points, same as the M16,
Yeah.
potentially, arguably, maybe it's even like 105. In fact, you know what? Make it
Cost
a
you nine, cost you 90 points if you take the German and give the officer a pistol and lose another point. Anyway.
yeah, what a treat. So I would say if you are going to cut the shots on the artillery piece version, make it about 100 points, and then keep the other, and then you've got the M16 version for 125 for a little bit extra survivability.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's probably
yeah.
nicely balanced. Because also the other thing as well is your M16 can buzz around the board, whereas the other guy's
Mm,
fixed. And so
yeah,
I'm paying 10 extra points to be fixed and
fixed.
then just avoidable.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Right.
bad.
Okay.
Moving on.
Let's end on a good note. All you Soviet players, lend-lease is back.
Huzzah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A few questions have come up in the last few days since the FAQ released, which is it like, so look, for example, it says M3 Stuart, and people have said, well, is that any M3 Stuart, any variation, or is it just the M3 Stuart? My understanding is because it specifies M4 75mm Sherman, M4 76mm Sherman, and so on, Matilda Mark II, not Matilda Mark I, it is just the core, the bare M3 Stuart.
British or American?
Well, it says either or.
Yeah,
I
but
know why you're asking because one gets recce and one doesn't.
yeah, yeah. And so I think I can have the M3
You have
Recce
the
Stewart.
US M3 wreckage jet. This was always the thing, wasn't it? That Soviets got in V2, Soviets got the M3 Recce Stewart, but Brits didn't because the Soviet unit profile was using the US M3 Stuart, which came with the option for Recce.
Yeah, so I think if we look at the American version, I think what I can have then from your reading, which I think is correct, I think you're absolutely right that it's the M3 specifically, is you pay 130 points, you don't have gyro stabilize, which is good because I don't think they could have used it anyway.
Yeah,
You have a second forward facing hull mounted medium machine gun,
yeah,
and you also have the vulnerable rule.
yeah,
And then for 10 points, 140 points, I can have a cheeky little recce version of it.
yeah, yeah.
That's decent. I like that.
The other one I query is the armored car. So the M3 White Scout car is listed in the armored car section. And the reason it's listed there, I went back and checked this before we started recording, is because that is effectively a cut and paste from V1 Armies of Soviet Union. Now, the M3 White Scout car as an armored car has recce, doesn't have a transport capacity. So I read that to tell me that I can't play Soviets and use the M3 Scout car as a transport
I would agree with that reading. Yeah.
because it's listed as an armored car.
Yeah. I'd agree with the reading. I don't know if I agree with it thematically. I
No,
don't really know enough about how they were used by the Soviets, but
yeah,
I think rules as written as we record, that's a correct interpretation.
yeah, I discussed it with people in the last week, and not everyone is seeing it that way. Now, whether or not people are seeing it that way because they want to see it positively and beneficially for them, for me, that says it's an armored car, and therefore it doesn't have a transport, but it gets the recce.
Agree.
Okay,
Yeah. Not even contentious from my perspective. I'd love to argue with you, but on this occasion, I don't feel
I
like
know
I
you
am.
do.
um, Are we going to go through all of the cues? I
No,
presume not. There is one though
go on.
on the Soviet note.
You take over on the cues of the FA variety.
I'm going to be honest. I haven't read the cues in great depth. I've sort of
Okay.
just scanned for eye-catching little numbers. Um, but on the Soviet note, we did get a body armor little clarification, didn't
Oh
we?
yes, we did. Yeah, yeah. That was whoever asked that. Well done. Thank you for that.
And I've got to say, fair play on this occasion to the FAQ. It's nice and simple. It says, does Soviet body armor apply in close combat? And the answer says, yes, it does. Dead simple. There's none of the like, fear gives you wings.
Yeah.
It's as simple as possible. And so that's actually really. Now, the counter argument, I saw someone comment on this saying, now, if you're in close combat with engineers and body armor, something else has gone horrendously wrong, and this doesn't really matter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, true, true.
But still, it's nice because you put them in, I don't know, like on an objective or something you don't want your opponent to get onto. They're going to be hard to shift.
Am I right in saying you can give body armor to tank riders?
Good question. I don't think you. Mm. Please hold. I actually don't know what the original wording, big rulebook, is on
Small
body armor.
arms. It says it protects them from small arms, and it came up in V2, didn't it? And it got added in the V2 errata.
What's really funny here is body armor could have done with becoming a universal special rule.
Yeah, yeah,
Even
yeah.
if it only ever applies to Soviets.
Yeah.
The assault engineers definitely get it for 3 points a model. The tank riders can have it as well.
Yeah.
You're absolutely
Okay.
right.
So
So the
let's
tank
jump.
riders get it good. Interestingly, I can't find where body armor is defined in the big rulebook, to be honest, because
It's not. It's in the force selection section. It's in the Soviet part of the force selection section. I'll tell you where it is. It's page. One moment, please. 255.
255.
It's a little box.
Oh, it's one of
those little boxes that
it's
you
a little
love.
fluff box.
It's a little fluff box.
Jeez
It's a really
Louise.
important rule. Yeah, jumping back to tank riders. There's a nice thing here, isn't there, where you take tank riders, you give them body armor, and then you drive your tank to an objective and you drop them off. Obviously, if you take if an enemy declares a shot against them prior to that point, they're going to auto dismount. But you start dropping body armored tank riders onto an objective, they're just going to sit there and not move.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna HE them off is the way you're gonna do it. I think that's
You're going to have to, yeah.
yeah, which is always the way that now that combat isn't as good, it's kind of what I'm leaning to now for shifting those kind of units either way, whether they're in body armor or not. But it certainly doesn't hurt having the body armor.
There's one more I want to highlight, which is clarification of DZEs.
Yes, that was definitely needed, and they've given us a picture, which exactly what should have happened in the rulebook, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're playing long edge deployment and so on, your DZE extends 12 inches from your long table edge up the sides, and if you're playing quarters, your DZE is the two edges of the table of your quarter, and that has implications for where first wave can come on, because if you're playing long table edge on first wave, you come on from any point on your DZE, therefore you can enter the table 12 inches in. If you're playing a mission like Breakthrough, where you can leave the table from your opponent's DZE, you can leave 12 inches along the side from your opponent's long table edge. We'll jump back to this when we talk about Beachhead. And also has implications for certainly for outflanking on quarters games, and we had this in our game, where you can just start outflanking like on the halfway line, right on top of your opponent, because they've deployed or come in at that point. So, yeah, it's a really useful clarification. For me, it has quite a big impact on events, and not just events, to be honest, has an impact on which mission you play with which deployment type and what deployment zone.
Oh, massively. That was going to be my point about the breakout, or double envelopment, as we used to call it, where in double envelopment, you'd have to go 48 inches minimum to get across that table. Now it's 24 inches,
Yeah.
which is not far, to be fair. If you've come on 12 up and you're running off 12 up. And so my reflection is that I think if we're going to play Breakout, we play it in quarters is probably the way to go.
Yeah. First wave quarters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you could play could you play prep? Yeah, you probably could play prep because you have to get off their DZE, so it's very easy with prepared positions to block your sides, if you know what I mean. Because people are having to run, probably going to have to run 4 foot because on the diagonal it's over 3 foot, and you're going to have terrain that you're wibbling around.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's more in the FAQ, but that's the things that have caught our eyes and that we've been discussing in the last week.
So I think that's all we have to say about the FAQ at the moment. If we missed anything that you're particularly worked up about, or if we've missed anything that you think has a massive impact on the game, please do drop it in the comments and we'll probably bring it up in the next episode. But I think we're going to move on to talking about Beachhead. Should we start with the pack for Beachhead this year, Phil?
Yeah, so Beachhead, it's the first sort of 2-day event of the calendar, if you like, in the UK. 1250 points. The pack was it told you what you needed to know. Like I didn't walk away from reading the pack going, can I do this? Can I do that? Da, 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 da. Couple of restrictions which were about multi-launches, because the pack was released quite early, to be fair, in terms of the life cycle of V3. And I know that Mike and Alex wanted to get it out early so people could plan for it at the back end of last year and get their list sorted and so on. But yeah, and I also know that Mike likes to play. Certainly at this point, he's very much like, well, let's just play the game as it's written without making too many changes and that sort of thing. But yeah, it was, the first big 2-day in the UK of the calendar year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right in terms of when it was released compared to V3 and getting it out in time to be on the website and everything. The restrictions were fairly generic, easy to understand. It was not really his problem. I'm not enjoying this trend towards 1250. And I'm big shout out to the Welsh Nationals for having a lower points limit. I do want to see a 1,000 point 2-day at some point because I like that decision making, but a bit of variety never hurt.
Mm,
As long as we don't all drift to 1250, 1,300 points,
mm.
I'm a happy chappy.
Yeah, mincemeat in November was 1,000, and I remember, but going back to our first episode, I liked the higher points because it allowed me to bring lists that were reflective of a force that I wanted to represent. I agree with you about 1250, and it's I think for me it's if you don't put limitations in terms of combinations of platoons or a dice cap or whatever it is, if you really want to spam things at 1250, you can spam things. And I'm saying this as someone who took Finns in comps on Mallets. And I know you mentioned this off there. I got to a point building my list where I'm like, I can stop now. I can stop at like 1100 or 1150 or something. I don't need the extra points. I'd rather not have to take the extra points because it's making me take things that maybe aren't as effective as if I didn't have that option. I know we're jumping ahead, but roll call, which is 1310, I'm approaching that in a very different way because I'm looking at the extra points going, I'm not just going to take an 1100 list and bolt on 150, 200 points. I'm looking at that in a different way. Whereas 1250, I've been to a few 1250 points already. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to variety. Yeah, just yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to variety. That said, however, I do know that Mike and Alex they wanted to make Beachhead beginner friendly and noob friendly, if you like. And if people have been playing at 1250 without restrictions, you can do that. But equally, and I know that Bo and Ali have looked at the list on Bo's channels. The spam potential and the min maxing potential is always going to be there, with very few or no restrictions at a higher points cost. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, that was what I was going to say about the 1250. That I did get to about 1,100 points with all the units I wanted, and then couldn't think of what I wanted basically. So I ended up just maxing out the mortar platoon effectively to use up my points. Um, and I did see some really. My other reflection off the back of the weekend when we talk about games is I did start to see some lists where you can get that real imbalance where maybe someone's taken loads of armor and
Yeah.
someone doesn't have access to a lot of anti armor,
Yeah.
and so Whereas at 1,000, I think that's limited to an extent because you
Yeah,
take two tanks that might be a quarter, even cheap tanks that maybe is a quarter of your points.
yeah,
And so, but at the same time, I don't think it's right to have a lower limit all the time because I like the variety. I like every one. And talking about roll call, I looked at just bolting maybe as a flamethrower team onto my Finns 1250 just to use up the points, which funnily is what I already did to Beachhead, just bolt on some stuff. But I think you're right. I think I'm going to try something new from the ground up to
yeah.
try and bulk out the points from the ground rather than just tacking on. Like I had
Hmm.
tough fight on all my troops at Beachhead because I had points to burn.
Yeah, yeah. We'll come on to that if we talk about our game.
In terms of the pack, one of the things, obviously, everything was nicely published in advance. The
Yeah.
timings, just as sort of like a logistical perspective. Now, one of the things I didn't really appreciate at first glance was the timings for the Saturday. It was only half hour between the rounds.
Mm.
And that felt very tight when we actually did that between the first and second game.
Yeah, but it changed, didn't it? The second to third game had a longer break, and Mike and Alex had said that they may change the timings accordingly. Um, but yeah, two half an hour breaks when you're playing 2.5 hour rounds is quite pressured, especially at somewhere like Beachhead where there's a lot of people there, not just people playing events, but also obviously the people going to the expo. And you're all fighting for the same drinks dispensers and food
Exactly.
dispensers and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
That was exactly my thing. I had a busy old week, didn't really get time to make myself a packed lunch. I thought not a problem because I know there's loads of food stalls. And then by the time I packed away my army, because I used up all the time game one, because it's a random pairing, it's because of that, even if you got tournaments all the time, it's usually someone you've not met before. So you have a nice game, you use up all the time. Packed away my army, I realized I had sort of like 15, 20 minutes to grab lunch. And then you get to all the food stalls, the queues are 10 minutes long. You don't want to risk it. So then it's like 3 o'clock by the next break. I like to have a lunch break in. And as you say, we did end up getting a lunch break between the second and third game. And so I just think I would have liked that factored in from the get go. Um, I think we had a longer break on the Sunday as well than originally advertised as well, didn't we?
We did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is nice, sort of like it is good that they've sort of reflected on that not being long enough and done it. Um, I think a bit more warning was the other reflection between the second and third game of like that it's going to be a longer break just in case anyone's made evening plans, like you
Mm.
don't want to suddenly turn up an hour late to whatever you got planned in the evenings. But as most players are staying there and going out for a beer with everyone else, that's usually not a huge problem.
Yeah.
Um, was there any other reflections on the pack? What did you think of the platoon limit? That because it was 5 platoons limited, wasn't it?
Yeah, no issues with that at all. I think like maybe one or two people at most took 5 platoons. So and again, if you look at Bo and Ali's video, they've done the analysis of how many took how many platoons. 4 platoons for me is plenty. 5 platoons is a bonus one kind of thing.
Yeah, I found that it's probably an unnecessary restriction. Obviously, the longer we play, the more we'll see if we need that restriction. But as you said, once I've done 2 platoons, I've usually got most of the things I want, and then I'm adding a third just to fill a gap in my list. So more than 5 platoons, I can't see many people running, and if they are, I can't see it being an advantage, to be honest.
I guess where the advantage might come, and it's not a particularly balanced list, is if you take, I don't know, 3 armored platoons, and you've done that by taking the most basic, inexperienced 5-man squads, inexperienced officer 3 times to access potentially 15 armored vehicle slots. Um, it's worth actually saying on this point. So Beachhead always has a theme. Beachhead, every year there's a different theme. Um, I don't know about you, but I felt this year that fewer people lent into the theme than previous years, and
I
that's
think
fine.
so.
You like
Yeah.
it's obviously people's choice and so on, but I've always liked Beachhead. This is the fourth time I've been, and it was the first event I went to as a bolt action player. I've liked Beachhead because it has a theme, and I didn't this year, but up until this year, I've always tried to lean into a genuine theme, and I felt this year it it was a there were some people that were theming, and there were others that were treating it as if it was a nationals or a GT, and that's perfectly fine, but it I don't know, it's either one or the other. Can it be both? I'm not sure. So
Yeah, I think you can have both in the same house, like the competitive and the thematic. I think that can work as long as the sort of the thematic players go in knowing that they could potentially face competitive players in advance and sort of have accepted that when they've bought their ticket, sort of up front. I thought in terms of the specific theme this year, it was sort of like Last Stands.
Mm.
The reason I didn't personally lean too hard into it is it was a bit sort of general. I thought anything can fit this theme, really. Like any units I can take, I can say they were at this place. And I didn't really know how to like explicitly represent that theme. Now, and I was thinking about this after the tournament myself, and I was thinking if it had been something like amphibious assault, which very much fits that it's beachhead. And so I know what I need to do. I need to take, instead of trucks, I'll take ducks. And instead of like, I don't know, kangaroos, I'll take LVTs. And then I have this amphibious assault force. I know how to do that a bit better. Now, obviously, the problem with that is not every army necessarily did an amphibious assault,
Yeah.
but that's the kind of theme that I'm thinking I'd like to do because it would be really fun and cool without setting my self back too much in terms of a competitive stance. But also, yeah, but it's just something a little bit more specific was my sort of reflection on it, and also a very clear the theme award being for the closest to the specific theme rather than just generally themed. I thought would be really if you made it really clear that whoever has the most amphibious force
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is
Hmm.
going to be the most themed. Then I know what I'm aiming for there.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Um, shall we jump into the missions then? Because that's kind of related to the pack, and they were pre-published,
Yes.
which I
Yep.
think was quite good. Especially now we've got missions with where you can combine your victory conditions with a different deployment, and
Mm.
then you sometimes have different outflanking rules depending on the
Hmm.
tournament. I quite like that, and I did. I mean, I didn't look too far in advance, but the day before each day, I was checking it. In terms of the specific missions, though, what did you think of them?
So I know that Mike wanted to only use rulebook missions. So we started with land grab, then we had breakthrough, then we had key positions, and then on day two we had hold until relieved and seek and destroy. And we've often talked on this pod about what makes for a good event, and it's a movement mission, it's a objective mission, it's a kill point mission, whatever. The other thing that you've strongly said, Jonny, is you like missions where there's more than one way to win. So with that in mind, land grab, great. Like it's the old sectors, it's the new land grab, no problem there at all. Breakthrough as a mission was great, but if you started the episode and listened to our comments about the FAQ and the DZE, and I benefited from this in my game. I was playing against Josh with a fairly static US list, and obviously I had 6 comms on my lets with units in. I can come onto the board 12 inches up and I can exit the board 24 inches later on the side. So in 2 turns, I can, if I've got the cover, I can run with my comsomol at 18 inches, do a single pivot, and then start the next turn. Oof, I'm off. So that's not a criticism of the pack and the mission and so on. It's a consequence of the deployment type and the mission with regards to DZEs.
Yeah, and my reflection on that is choosing quarters would have been more successful with breakthrough. For that, I actually didn't realize the DZE thing until I snapped 2 squads of engineers, ended 1 inch from the long table edge, but right in the corner, and then realized, oh wait a minute, I could have run sideways off the table there, and then had to just sort of like pray they survive till the next turn, basically.
Yeah.
So I think quarters will solve that. The other thing you said about there being more than one way to win,
Mm.
double envelopment used to have kill points
Yes.
and breakthrough doesn't,
Doesn't. Yeah.
which means that if you bring a slow army, you're pushing for the draw, really. Like if you bring a gun line, which you
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
now, the spotters have been nerfed, but let's say you did,
Yeah.
you're pushing for the draw, and that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and my opponent Josh, he did have 2 half tracks with with units and bazookas and so on, but he had 4 artillery pieces, which meant that he obviously deployed a gun line, and the way our game panned out, he had one artillery piece on either flank. Once I'd taken out both the artillery pieces, because there wasn't a lot of terrain on either flank, my mobile transport had a field day, just flooded either side, And now I did, take some units out because I was looking to get the secondary and what have you. But I was effectively like, well, I just need to knock out some of these artillery pieces, and I could just drive off the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on. Key positions I want to talk about as well, because we played each other key positions.
We did. We did. We had a Tommy's face off at the end of day one. Yeah.
And my takeaway from that is you thought I was going to stack the table, but I had to play the first objective, so you could very easily counter that. And the
Yes.
problem we had is we had an even number of objectives. So basically, it was
Yes.
in quarters. You put your three in your quarter, well, in a quarter, opposite to the quarter I put my three in, and then
Yeah.
obviously just chose a quarter and
Yeah.
roll off. And then we were playing, and neither of us had enough force really to, because you had vehicles and I hadn't taken a lot of anti vehicles.
You had a lot of AT rifles, to be fair.
Yeah, I had a lot
So
of AT rifles, but you had tough armor on your
I had tough.
T28s.
Yeah,
And
and
so
the BA10s as well. Yeah, with recce.
I wasn't convinced that I could, like, basically because we had three each.
Yes.
In order to win, I was going to have to table you because you had enough units around your objectives that at one point I tried to steal one, and then you said, and then you remind me that the Comsomolets stops me capturing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was like 2.9 inches away as well. But even if I'd taken that, like the next turn, as I was sort
Yeah.
of like thinking about, is there a way I can win this game? Thinking about it, I was like, it was irrelevant because the only way that I tried to capture that was with the Counterpartio. And you
Yeah.
were going to wipe them because you still
Yeah.
had stuff in reserve. And then you were just
Yeah.
going to take it back anyway because I had nothing to contest. And so
Yeah.
my reflection from all of that said is I think at tournaments we should push for always using odd numbers of objectives.
Yeah. So yeah, on the way home on Sunday and Monday, I was thinking about the missions that we played at Beachhead, but also the missions that we played since V3, and then some of the missions that we played previously in V2 from Bolt Action Alliance, some of the Jugger missions, some of the missions that Russ uses at SSWG. And I'm gonna commit to it because I'm gonna say it publicly. I'm gonna put together like 7 or 8 what I think work for missions at tournaments, which will be V3 relevant, but allowing you to win in multiple ways. So penetrating strike was one that we played at WTC, which is like the old double envelopment, but you can't exit the board, and kill points matter. Yeah, love that. Replace breakthrough with something like that, where, or maybe you can leave the board, but kill points still matter.
That's
For
my
example,
thing. Do
yeah,
breakthrough, but 1 victory point per kill.
yeah.
So you have both. Easy.
Key positions. It's a D3, and on
Yeah.
a 1, it's 3 objectives. On a 1 or a 2, it's 3 objectives. On a 3 or 4, it's 5 objectives, and on a 5 or a 6, it's 7 objectives.
Exactly. Perfect.
Okay, so you get rid of the even ones. Then we come on to the 4th mission.
Yes, this one from your tone and from,
Yes.
I mean, we've discussed this at length off air.
Yeah.
Hold until relieved.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
basically top secret, but you don't move the objective, which
Yeah.
means not only do you only have one way to win,
Yeah.
there's only one of that one way, if you see what I mean. Like, whereas with key positions, you had 3 objectives that I could have stolen. There's still only one way for me to win, but there's 3 ways to that one way. If you see what I mean.
Yes.
This was basically a game of my reading of the mission before the night before I played it was all I have to do is put my entire army on the objective before you do, and
Yep.
then you have to table me to win the game.
Yes. Yeah. So effectively, it's because of sticky objectives, is my view.
Mhm.
Effectively, whoever gets on turn 2, whoever gets onto that objective first and is able to, in my game, for example, against Andy played it brilliantly. And I would have done the same to him if I'd got onto the objective first. You take the objective with an infantry piece, and then if you've got armored vehicles, you just circle the wagons around that objective, because the armored vehicles can't take the objective, but they can contest. So if you've taken the objective first, your opponent has to clear all your units from that objective, which is sticky, and also get their own infantry unit there in order to take it back. And Andy played a brilliant game, and Andy got on there first on turn 2. We didn't get to turn 6. By turn 4 and 5, I'd started to clear his units, but I couldn't clear his armored vehicles. He was playing Hungarians with the little CVs. He had a couple of them in the vicinity, and I just couldn't clear them because I ran out of time. Now, if I'd got the jump on turn 2, I'd have snapped to with my company commander if he'd been alive and he managed to pop him in turn one. But my plan was to snap to with my company commander and just run 4 comms towards that objective and see what happens when he starts picking them off and destroying them and they fall out onto the objective. So, we both knew by midway through turn two, not where it's going to go, but it's 95% likely that Andy's going to win this because he got to the objective first. I was playing next to Michael Carrick and Bill Green, and Carrick nearly tabled Bill, but Bill won the game because Bill got onto the objective first. He was playing, he's playing Finns, and he wasn't spamming Finns in the way that I did and others did in the sense of Comsomelettes. It was a proper finish list, if you like, but he was able to get up there with a couple of Comsomelettes, get the objective, park the bus, and Carrick almost tabled him because and I think by the end of it, Bill had like 5 or 6 models left across 3 units. They just happened to be in and around the center, and Carrick wasn't able to clear them in time. And I just don't think that's a good mission. That's nothing to do with Beachhead and Alex and Mike. That mission is not, for me, a good tournament mission. And I've said this before about Top Secret, and we know that I don't like Demolition, the old school Demolition. It's okay now, but I don't like the old school one. So, yeah, I didn't enjoy seeing Hold Until Relief within the mission for that reason.
I don't think it's a bad tournament mission. I think it's a bad mission, full stop. I don't think this is a fun mission to play down the club either, for exactly the reasons you said. Because if you are playing to win, which you are, even when you're playing casually, like we play games to win, the only viable strategy is that strategy. You rush on, you get on it, or you table your opponent.
Yeah.
And you can't really necessarily table your opponent because if someone brings 20 dice, it's target saturation. That's what I played against. I was playing Matt Sparrow, and he did a really tactical deployment, which was really strong, and he brought his stug in 12 inches up on the side and got a nice side shot on a Comsomelette, but I was like, I don't care. I literally just, my last 5 dice were the 5 Comsomelettes that ran exactly 18 inches up the table. Next dice, next turn, the very first dice I got, officer snaps a Comsomelette in a squad who just rushed the objective. I've now got the objective. I can rest easy. I'm not even going to fight you particularly. I'm just going to go into ambush most of the time. I'll maybe use my tank rifles against your stug to put pins on you, try and slow you down. But so like all of the fighting I was doing was just as stuff came towards the center, I might hose it with a flamethrower and stuff like that. But like, I was basically playing a game where I'm like, just shoot me. I know you can't take out 22 dice this quickly.
Whereas if we had to play Hold Until Relieved, and I was talking to Carrick about this during the week, let's say that you give 3 points for holding the objective at the end of the game, but kill points matter.
Then it works.
There's a genuine choice here because you can rush the objective on turn 2, take it, circle the wagons, park the bus, but if you lose too many units, you're going to lose on kill points.
Well, funnily, I was going to say that I don't think this mission is savable. Like in the way that I said, add kill points to breakthrough, I was thinking there is no save for this mission, just trash it. But actually, that's how we tried to save demolition in V2, didn't we? We made the demolition objective worth more than 3, and I think for this you would have to as well, because I did go down about at least 5 dice compared to Matt, I think, because I did rush the center, and so I think you need to make it about 5 to 10-ish. Obviously, play test it, see what the right amount is. I think 5's probably enough to tempt you, but not make you uncatchable, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you were playing on one side of me, Carrick was on the other, and whilst I was trying to, knock Andy off, I was watching what you guys were doing, and your dice and Carrick, Bill's dice were just falling, but it's like you didn't care because both of you had the objectives. So Matt and Carrick in the respective games had to really push and work hard, as did I. Yeah.
And I think, and the funny thing is as well with this mission is I think Matt realized what I was doing turn 2. He realized that I decided I didn't care about kill dice on this occasion. I just wanted to win. But at that point, he's deployed wide, and it's kind of too late to save the game there. Whereas in key positions, sometimes you can realize your opponent's strategy is going to get the better of you on turn 2 or 3, and you've still got 3 turns to counter it because you might have another objective within range. Here, if you've put like your infantry on the flanks, they're kind of stuck there because they're not getting to the middle in time.
Yeah, I played Carrick in a practice game I don't know, like October maybe. So like, just after V3 had come out, and we played Hold Until Relieved, and I deployed wide with 4 or 5 units up the center. He went narrow. He got the objective first, and then we just punched each other for the next 5 turns to see who was left. I think it was a draw in the end because we just kind of ran out of units in the middle. But you're right. If you do what Matt did, like you just said, if you go wide and then try and arrowhead in, you just need to go really narrow and just go for it. I don't think it's a good mission for that reason. But I do think if you add these things like, okay, objective is worth X number of points, but kill points are also worth 1 point each, you need to win by 2 clear points at the end, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, Grand Tactical, where we had this, was good fun. Where because you're trying to get off the other side, you might be trying to get off the other side of the table, so you just abandon it basically, or and that would be interesting to add it to breakthrough as an alternative condition where get off the table or hold the middle one.
Yeah.
The last mission
Not,
was all right though. Oh,
yeah. It was the last mission was Seek and Destroy, and it was nice to finish on Seek and Destroy because you often start on Seek and Destroy, or you might see it as the third mission on day one because you're all a bit frazzled by that point. So it's quite nice to just play Seek and Destroy. It was it was first wave, wasn't it? Long table edge, yeah. Just bit of a non-thinking mission in that sense.
somewhat. I mean, I encountered issues here because of the long
Okay,
table edge.
okay,
And interestingly, this is where I faced the counter finish force because I faced Andy's Hungarians
right,
at the
yeah,
worst
yeah.
possible time because
No outflanking and all that.
no
Yeah.
outflanking, but also jumping back to your point about terrain on the flanks. I
Hmm.
had a table with no terrain on the flanks,
Yes.
open middle. He's got a lot of armor with long range
Yeah.
shooting. I've got very little long range shooting other than my mortars. And I know we talk about sort of like asymmetrical tables being okay, but
Mhm.
actually on this occasion, he's got Nebbles. One side of the table, there was nowhere to advance other than behind buildings. The other side of the table had more hills.
Yeah.
He run the roll off, put me on the house side. I literally couldn't advance up the table because I can't outflank. I can't
Hmm.
use the flanks,
Hmm.
like to push up and then push in. There was no way for me to cross that table without getting
Hmm.
destroyed. And so I played very defensively there.
Which is not how you play. So you've been forced into the situation because of the circumstances and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and Andy did the same basically because he knew that if he pushed up,
Yeah.
but he had to push up if he wanted dice off me because I was just playing hide and seek basically.
Yeah.
And so by about turn two, we knew we were heading drawwards.
Yeah.
Like we knew it was going to be a draw. So it was interesting in that it was like a combination of different things and only one little like tweak, like more line of sight blocking terrain, for example, that wasn't a house, or like quarters deployment, perhaps. Just one little tweak here might have made the game just a little bit more exciting in that one of us might have played for the win. And so that was interesting that actually I wasn't sure on this mission. Whereas normally I'm exactly where you're at, where I'm
Mm.
like, seek and destroy, great mission. Just throw yourself at the opponent, see what sticks.
Yeah. I mean, and I have said this before on the pod. I don't like the kill point missions when it's only kill points because I like to move things around. I like to think about where do I need to be at what point of the game in order to win the game, kind of thing. Be that key positions. I used to love timely objectives. I know you didn't, but I used to love timely objectives for that reason and that sort of stuff. The straightforward, come at me, bro. Roll some dice. Like end of a tournament, fine, but it's not one of my favorite ones. But it's not as bad as Hold Until Relieved.
Yeah. And funnily in this one, like there's a couple of FAQ things that came up in this game in terms of the latest FAQ that's just been released where this was the game where he had two Nevils, I had none, but I have my four heavy mortars. The spotter allowed me to focus in on one Neville at a time,
Yeah.
which allowed me to counter it, which basically allowed me to hold him to a draw, and because he wasn't getting that chance to do lucky sixes. But the first one that I hit, I only killed three of the four men, and he ran away behind the thing.
Yeah.
And my reflection when I got the FAQ was that wouldn't have worked now. So, funnily, we've made Nebels more powerful because I wouldn't have been able to counter battery to the same extent because only one of my heavy mortars would have been able to range on the Nebel because only one spotter could see one Nebel at a time. And so it would have taken me much longer to counteract the Nebel Werfers.
Yeah, and that is one of the reasons why for the next, it's not the next two, for the next 1/3 event I'm going to, I'm bringing observers alongside one or two spotters,
Yeah.
so that I've got a bit of a spread and a bit of a saturation
The
of line
problem
of
is, though, they
sight.
can't be in the same place. That's the problem. Because the reason that I was able to counter his Nebels there was because the one spotter could see the one
Could see
Nebel.
could see the one level, yeah.
Whereas I couldn't have deployed four spotters in a tower on top
No,
of each other.
yeah,
And so let's say two of my mortars would have done nothing. And I
yeah,
probably wouldn't have been able to take out the Nebel as quickly. So this is why I'm actually quite irked by this FAQ. To jump all the way back to the beginning, I'm
yeah.
really irked that actually you've made Nebels more powerful. Ironically, we've made artillery worse, which makes Nebels better. But shall we jump into a little bit of analysis of what people brought?
Yeah, there were a lot of Finns, and I know a lot of people have said, "Oh, people are jumping on the bandwagon and so on." But if you look at who took Finns, you've been playing Finns for a while. Sally's been playing Finns for a while. Bill Green's been playing Finns for a while. I don't know about the others, but it wasn't like there were, what, 7 finish lists and 7 brand new players kind of thing. I've owned Finns for about 18 months. I just never got around to building them. So there were a lot of Finns. There weren't a lot of US, and that is interesting because I other than Beachhead, I've exclusively been playing US at events. They've sort of become my V3 army, partly for a change from V2, and partly because I had a bunch of Marines that I wanted to paint up. But we didn't see many US lists.
Yeah, the US was sort of the fourth biggest nation taken, whereas historically, I think people like them thematically. So you got competitive and thematic players. For me, the Soviets is the real
Mm,
one. They've really
hmm
jumped right down.
hmm Both
And
both in number and also position within the final table. Yeah.
yeah, so in terms of armies played, I'll quickly just run
Mhm.
through them with no commentary. British 8, Japan 5, Finns 8, France 1, Hungary 1, sorry, Hungary 2, Partisans 1, Soviets 3, Germany 10, US 6 was the final numbers of people who turned up on the day. So the Finns were well repped, but not ridiculous. 8, as you say, sort of 4 or 5 of those 8 were playing Finns to some degree previously. The Brits really have dropped down the popularity scales. Germany's. So I'm surprised Germany's so high since we didn't allow the armies of Germany.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
equally, armies of Germany didn't add that much compared to the rulebook, did it?
Yeah.
Everyone seemed to lurk around the 3 platoons, which kind of implies what we were saying earlier, that 3 platoons seems to be a sweet spot. Now, some of the analysis, now that we've had the event,
Hmm.
that hasn't been repeated elsewhere, is we can start to see where certain units are starting to fall. And one of the ones that I was interested in, because I'm not convinced on it, but so I'm interested to see if you're convinced because you took one, is the company commander.
Hmm.
So we had a grand total of 10 company commanders out of the 44 nations,
Yeah.
and they kind of finished across the board. So, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
first, 6th, 12th, 16th,
Yeah.
19th, and then, but they ended at 39th.
Yeah.
And so we've got a nice even spread of where they landed. So that's implying to me that they're neither competitive nor not competitive. They're sort of like if you have a use for them and use it well, it could
Yes.
be useful, but not
Yes.
always. Is that
Yeah.
your reflection?
100%. So we all built up. I mean, I'll speak on behalf of them. I think we all built our lists in mind with the fact that the company commander is going to negate pins. We're taking open top vehicles, and we want the ability to rush forward at a certain point. So my list was entirely mobile. It was 6 squads. Four were like Jakari. They weren't sissy. They were sort of Jakari SMGs rifles. 2 were engineers. I had a company commander. The company commander was there to negate the unreliable impact with the pins and the ability to rush forward. The 2 games where my company commander died early were the ones I didn't win or draw. Yeah, my two losses were where my company commander was taken out early doors. The wins and the draw against you, the company commander was sticking around because that morale bubble of 12 inches when you're playing things with open tops and unreliable, for example, or even just unreliable vehicles, that had a huge impact. So I took it for a very specific reason. Now, the next event I'm going to, I haven't got one. The second event, my list, I haven't got one. The third one I built a list on the basis of this company commander is going to do something for me, be that negating pins, be that snapping two for a particular reason, whatever it is. I didn't take one prior to Beachhead. I haven't taken one before in V3, other than maybe just trying it out in a casual game. So it's not an auto include by any means, but if you've got a specific thing you want to do, be that negate pins, be that snap two, whatever it is, they're not game changing, but you can build a list around them would be my analysis.
Yeah, I think my takeaway, exactly as you say, you can build your list around them, but they are quite a lot of points. And so I think it balances out that you get this really amazing ability if you've built your list to do something specific, but you do pay the points for it. And so it's kind of like you win some, you lose some. And I think it's nicely balanced. And so I
Yeah,
think
but
it
if
does have a place, but it's not an auto include in my
no,
perspective.
and as we said earlier, at 1250, you've got points to burn. Now, at the 1100 limit that I'm going to soon, I haven't got a company commander because I'm not spending 40 whatever points in experience or 60 points regular to take a company commander because I want to spend it elsewhere. But if I've got extra points because I've taken the units that I want already, if my build justifies it, I would absolutely think about putting in a company commander. It's main, if I'm honest, it's mainly for the pins. It's mainly for the pin negation.
Yeah. Moving on to how many dice were there. The average dice count was 18.
Mhm.
Now, there wasn't really a trend across where
No,
the right amount of dice is, if I'm honest. Much like the company commander, there's a slight trend that the higher lists had more dice, but we're talking a difference here of sort of, I think the average, if you draw a trend line, it's like 19 at the top and sort of 17 at the bottom. So about 18 seems to be the sweet spot, it would seem, for tournament play.
and I think that's fair at 1250. I certainly haven't done this yet with V3. I'm not looking for a magic number and trying to get that amount of dice because if you do that, the danger is that you take really squishy, irrelevant units. And I know, the argument is the more dice you've got, the more chance you've got for your dice coming out when you need it. But given that there's no small team bonus anymore, for example, given that everything hits on a 4, 5, 6 at worst kind of thing, stuff gets hit really easily. And if they're single guys who've already activated and therefore can't go down, you're just feeding dice to your opponent.
Yeah. My thing with dice is I like to have at least sort of like 14, let's say, at 1,000 to 1,200. But again, I'm not aiming for a specific number, but what I do like to think about is I do like a reserve and an outflank. I like to hold back my force to counter your force. Um, and that, as I say, either reserve or outflank, both are good fun. And so I like to do an even number of dice and have thought about what I'm reserving beforehand. And because
Yeah.
what I hate is if you have to reserve the transport but deploy the squad or vice versa,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
really frustrating. And so, and in this one as well, there was one mission where we had to reserve half of our force.
Yes.
And so again, that fed my idea of, well, I'll know what I'm reserving before I even get to the table because I don't want to think about that. And
Yeah.
so I think not that dice, not that important, but aim for the higher side, but not too high.
Yeah, without compromising in terms of the number of units you're taking. So, like you said, if you get an odd number and you've got missions where you must reserve a half or whatever, or equally just taking squishy stuff just to try and give you the advantage. I'm really glad mule teams don't exist in the main rulebook for V3. That obviously there's
Mm,
mule teams in the arms of Germany, so we get around that like cheeky little 4-point dice. And I was guilty of it, at the WoW and WTC and so on, because you would, if you can, you would in that situation. But I can remember, and we talked about this actually in our episode post WTC. I was like, I don't think I needed the number of dice I took. I actually could have, beefed up some units and taken one or two fewer.
Yeah. Funnily, I never used to take a mule team, and as a
No.
cheesy competitive player, you would think I would, but I never used to, and I don't see myself doing it in the future either. If we can move on to the next bit of analysis, though, the thing that I'd like to talk about in tandem, because I referenced it in the FAQ, is the MMGs and sniper teams. Now, we didn't see a lot of either, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Yep.
Exactly as I said previously, we made snipers worse to encourage people to take MMGs. It hasn't worked. There was a
Mm-hmm.
total of 7 MMG teams at the tournament. The MMG teams all finished in the bottom half of the table, so that says either they're bad or they're not being taken by people who want to play super competitively.
Yep.
The snipers did slightly better. We had one in the top 10, but we only had 15 snipers across the tournament.
Was that a Finnish player in the top 10 with a sniper?
No, that was a Japanese player, as it happens. That was Doug.
Oh, it's Doug. Okay.
Yeah, who finished eighth. Well done.
Yeah, yeah. If you said it was a Finn, I could understand that because of leaning into the national characteristic, for
Well,
example.
the great irony is not a single Finnish player took a sniper, I don't believe. Oh,
Brilliant.
sorry, I take that back. Mike Parker
I was going to
took
say
two of them.
Michael Sally would be the sort of list where you would, unlike us cheesy ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think he was the only Finnish player. And this was as I looked at the Finnish list, that was the thing that surprised me that V2, we would have always seen a sniper.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think because they've been hit with the nerf bat,
Yeah.
like, why would you? Because unless someone has a really important spotter or a really important officer, there's nothing for your sniper to do all game other than put one pin out, which now matters less than ever. And so it kind of demonstrates my point that we made snipers worse to encourage people to take MMGs. No one's taking MMGs. No one's taking snipers. Can we just have good snipers again, please?
I'll report back in 10 days because Three Good Men is next weekend, and which I'm going to. I've got two snipers in my list. And my reasoning is that with the spotter FAQ situation, spotters are going to become more valuable. Therefore, snipers have got more valuable targets to take out. I'm also taking snipers, and this episode gets published after the list deadline, so I can say this because I'm taking two observers, and I want my observers to last as long as possible in order to maximize the points that I'm using for them.
Yeah, funnily, with that being a really thematic one, I can't see people taking the snipers. And so using snipers as counter snipers is a good idea. I think that is a good idea. However, on the spotter point, I'm now having for my four heavy mortars, I now have to take four spotters if I want to keep them out of line of
Yeah,
sight.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so one sniper's not going to take out four spotters in a game. And
No,
so
but I
and so it makes the sniper worse in that regard from my perspective. But I think for thematic play, he might be better. So I am interested to see how that pans out for you.
yeah, so am I.
Um, the other surprise that I just wanted us to look at now, in terms of what type of platoons people were taking, we had
Yeah,
two recce platoons, both finished in the top 10. It
yeah,
was players who had a very specific thing they were trying to achieve, I think. So
yeah.
there's not a huge amount of analysis for recce there. But the engineers were a bit of a shock because, in my mind, I was expecting sort of half the players to bring engineers, or maybe it's a quarter at least. There was only 6 players who brought an engineer platoon.
Confirmation bias, Johnny.
Well, it is very
Because
much because the thing is, it's so cheap to throw in. Like, most people were taking at least one flamethrower in V2.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And so I assumed that would be carried through, and we'd have sort of like 80% of the players might want to take one, but
yeah.
only half of that could justify adding another platoon in order to take 2 squads of engineers. But yeah, only 6 players.
So that was me, you, Gary.
Yep. We we then had Ben Smith, who had Germany. We
Yeah,
had, and he finished 32. We then had Adam Hogg, Soviet Union. He
yeah.
finished 36th with an engineer platoon. And then James Clark, Soviet Union. He finished 42 with an engineer platoon. And that was all the engineer platoons.
So actually, the only person that did anything worthy of note, no disrespect to people, with engineers was you, because the rest of us were, 16th and below. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really interesting that the engineers, not only did we not see a lot of them, they didn't.
It did do very well.
They
Yeah,
spread across the board, but more so towards the bottom half of the table. Sort of
yeah,
four of the six were in the bottom half of the table, and two were in the top half. And so I found that really fascinating, to be honest. Of all the things that, thank you to Alex, by the way, because he's the one who sent me this
yes.
analysis. Um, of all the other ones, that was the one that surprised me the most. That engineers not only weren't taking very much, but also they didn't do very well.
Yeah, mine when they were when they hit they hit. My last game, I think I ran out of
Was
fuel
that
and I
like
just
Anchorman, where it was 40% of the time they worked every time?
it is, yeah. My last game, I think I missed and ran out of fuel on the first one. I just started assaulting with them because I had a couple of SMGs and I was like, doesn't matter now, let's go, kind of thing. Um, I mean, I never took a huge amount in V2. Maybe the Brengineers at the more competitive events, but I wanted to try them out in the comms omelets because I wanted to have an entirely mobile force and with the ability to strike wherever. And I only played 2 games. I played no games before the list went in, so I submitted the list with no practice, and I played 2 games afterwards. And both games with Ben and Carrot, they were both like the ability for my list to just get to another part of the board really quickly was very beneficial. So I'm glad that I tried it out and took them. I'm not going to drop them by any means at all. I just need to refine how I and how I build that list. So
Yeah, I think my reflection is that we tried to reduce the flamethrowers in the game, basically, is what V3 did. We very
yeah,
clearly tried to, because we made engineers more expensive, we made flamethrowers more expensive, we made flamethrowers worse.
mm-hmm.
And I actually think that the thing that's had the biggest effect is just the platoon structure. The fact that you have to commit to 2 squads of engineers in order to have a single flamethrower team actually solved the problem in and of itself. Because I think most people just wanted the one flamethrower as sort of your last resort weapon. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think now they're using something else as that last resort weapon.
Yeah. When I have taken them, I've taken them for a reason. Yeah. And I've as another event coming up where I am absolutely going to keep going with mobile flamethrowers, because I've decided that event with that point structure or that platoon structure and so on, that's one where I want to try it out as well. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I think what we haven't done yet, even though we've talked quite a bit about our games,
Yeah.
we actually haven't talked through our lists yet. So I think what we should probably do is say what we took
Yeah.
and then quickly talk through how we ended up, basically. Obviously, we've talked through probably the highlights of our games, but I think it would be good to say sort of where we ended up finally. So, what did you have in your finish list, Phil?
So off the top of my head, 19 dice. I had 6 infantry units, which were 4 of them were sort of SMG and rifle squads with between 3, 4, and 5 SMGs in each. I think 2 were 6 man and 2 were 4 for 5 man. And I know people jumped on that, Ali and Bo, and said, why are you taking 5 man finish squads? It's like, yes, because you would normally take even numbers because when you get to 50%, it was the ability to then stick a platoon commander, or in my case, a company commander. So I had, the 1 rifle platoon with 4 squads. I had an engineer platoon with 2 squads, flamethrowers and SMGs. I had obviously the 2 platoon commanders. I had a company commander. And then I had an armor platoon, which was 2 T28s and 2 BA10s, and then 6 comms omelettes. So everything was mobile. Uh, the missions where I needed to move around the board went really well. The missions where I needed to not die didn't go particularly well because the pins just stacked up and it was like, failing. I got pinned out a couple of times. I got in 2 separate games, and this is my fault for not rallying soon enough. And you did it to me, and I think my last opponent, Ian, did it to me. I I took so many pins before I was able to rally a Comsommeret that even though they were veteran, they got to 10 pins and the Comsommeret ran away with the unit inside. I was like, that's a big hit for a veteran unit and the Comsommeret. And it didn't take you particularly to hit me 5 times that quickly. If you were really thinking about it, you might even just snap to and just to get like 6 pins, three units, shoot 6 pins in one go. I'm like, oh, okay, but don't get the next dice. That Comsommeret is going. So
Yeah, with me it was the 4 heavy mortars, wasn't it? Because
yeah,
I was snapping them 2 at a time. I think the first time you go down to 5s, I don't think I got any lucky 6s. And then you're guaranteed one of them's going to get it.
mm-hmm.
And then you just sort of play in that game of, well, now you're stationary again. because if you do the rally to shift the pins,
You're just
if
gonna
I've
get hit
ranged
next
in
turn. Yeah,
and I get the first dice, I'm going to do it again and do it again
yeah,
and do it
yeah.
again. Um, and so yeah, the unreliable is a bit of a it's a cruel
Unreliable.
mistress, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I mean, I wanted to be a little bit quirky, so I was like, I'm going to make them all yeah, mobile. I was limited by models, so one of the sort of justifications for building the finish list was I'd got hold of we had some of the Winter Fallschirmjäger from the Battle of the Bolstart set. I bought the Platoon box set, and then Warlord kindly sent me some two sprues of the new German vets, and I played Bill Green at Warfare, and Bill had used the Winter Fallschirmjäger as the majority of his Finnish models, and I went, okay, there's something here. Then I saw the new German vets and was like, there's definitely something here. Then I did some more research, and I also kit bashed some of the SS models as well. So I kind of used what I had to build a list that was a bit interesting, and then I just needed to, buy some more comsomelettes basically. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I already
Whereas,
had the Comsomelettes.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, your list was, it was, yeah. Obviously, you can tell us
mm.
what was in it, but it was a much more rounded, thought through finish list with the Johnny Curran special going on as well.
Yeah, it was basically my V2 fins. So I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of time before the tournament. I did fancy Germans, but then I basically lent on what I had the most painted of. Um, and then it was supplemented with the fact that engineers are available for fins now. And so I already had the five Comsomelettes. I had four squads of engineers to go in them. I took my Kauka party on skis, which I've always taken because why not? They're a bit expensive if you can't have flank, but still, it's better with SMGs. I had five sissies. My engineers and my sissies were all veteran and tough because I had so many points to play with.
Yeah,
Um, four anti-tank rifles I took again, all veteran because I had so many points to play with. Because like I usually play around 1,000, so give me 1250. I don't know what to take basically, and then sort of the possibly like the man of the match was the mortar platoon, the four heavy
hmm
mortars.
hmm
It sometimes it did nothing, but when it did something, it was big. So like that's what allowed me to hold the Hungarian siege roll
yeah,
because I managed to nerf the Nebels. Um, but they were regular with spotters because I figured they're not going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
getting into combat very much, especially now I'm not allowed to charge with them.
yeah,
Like they're not going to get
yeah.
shot very much. The only time I fancied the veteran on them was with the spotter.
hmm
And that was one of the things that came up in our game, wasn't it? That because the Finns have the half the men,
Yes,
you go up a veterancy.
yeah,
I didn't care about odd numbers. On that note, actually, that you were saying, I didn't care about odd numbers because I was already veteran. So
mm.
having +1 morale when I've got three officers that I don't really want anyway. Oh, I took them as three-man teams as well, regular SMGs.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I didn't care about the extra morale, so I was happy to play with odd-numbered squads. But the when the mortar goes down to half strength,
mm.
the spotter would also go up. But
hmm
because there's five men in my heavy mortar plus the spotter, is it half of the mortar squad or is it half of the
Half of
five, including the
the
spotter?
total unit. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
luckily
yeah.
that never came up. If I was getting attacked with the mortar, I just lost it, which was really lucky.
Yes, yeah,
Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed the list, and the only things that I really had to build leading up to it was getting the flamethrowers in, and I sort of
yeah.
lent on my German. I proxied some Germans, if I'm honest, but you couldn't tell because I was already using German models for a lot of my fins. Um, and the heavy mortars, I had to 3D print some heavy mortars. Lastminute.com.
And your spearman
Oh
slash
yeah,
AT rifles.
yeah, that's true. I forgot about them. I kit bashed using the German winter sprue and the
Yeah,
Soviet winter sprue because the Soviet winter sprue comes with AT rifles. I used
yeah,
the Soviet arms where the weapons aren't attached, the Soviet AT rifle, put it on a winter German body because that's closer to the Finnish uniform. But because I had them all holding them up, didn't I? So they
yeah,
all look like little spearmen.
yeah. Whereas I built and painted an entire army in about 4 weeks worth. So I really got stuck into them before Christmas, and was enjoying the kit bashing and green stuffing stuff and so on. Then I got distracted by another game manufacturer and another game over Christmas, and then I had to, like, oh, I better write a list now. Like, and I did the classic the night before / early in the morning of the day, finishing off painting the T28. But I really enjoyed building and painting them as well. And I think that's another thing. If I hadn't enjoyed the process of kit bashing and building them and doing the research, and Bill Green and I were emailing back and forth with ideas and so on, I wouldn't have jumped on board with the fins. It was the whole project rather than just, oh, fins are really good because they're cheap consommelettes and unreliable 30-point discount. It was like, I want to treat this like I have with other armies as a project, as a thing. So
Yeah, for me, it was more about the tournament. Like, I was going to Beachhead for Beachhead, and the US at the minute, my old favorite, I don't like the rules. We've lost our mobility. I don't really care about playing US, which says quite a bit. Germany, I was thinking about taking Germans, but there was a couple of units that I was excited about in Armies of Germany that obviously I couldn't take yet. So I wasn't excited about that. And so the Finns were kind of an old reliable for me. I imagine I probably won't. I'll probably only take them now to tournaments where I don't really know what to take, where there isn't something exciting that I've got in mind. I think roll call, I'm thinking about going with something a little bit exciting rather than just adding to the fins.
yeah.
The tournament, though, should we jump into how we did game for game? Obviously, we already know what the missions are, but
Yeah, I mean, I'll really quickly. So, game one, playing land grab against Gary Morgan. One of us played the mission. What somebody else thought we were playing, Seek and Destroy. So, Gary had a very similar list to me. He had, two half tracks and lots of units in. I had 18 dice or 19 dice. He had 18, so it's pretty even. I was playing it cagey, basically waiting for, like, turn 4, turn 5. I'm going to start, to really push in. Gary rolled a 6 to take out take out a consommolette with unit inside, and then hid. And turns out he thought we were playing kill points, so he was like, "Oh, I'm 2 points up now. It's over to you, Phil. You need to do something." All the while, I am just slowly advancing from my quarter into the midpoint and then into the into his zone. And the last dice of the last turn, he kept moving his units around to, like, give me a little cheeky, like, try and bait me out because he had bazookas and so on. And he left I sort of did the mental maths. He'd left an inexperienced officer a little bit too close. So I just moved the consommlet up, advanced out the engineers, and flamed it. So he won 2-1 on dice. But he didn't win on the mission points in any way because he was stuck in his quarter.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was my. I'll do all of my 5. That was my round 1. My round 2 was against Josh. US list, 4 static artillery pieces, 2 half tracks and so on. Playing breakthrough, tricky game for him. So that was another win. And then we played in round 3, key positions. That was a draw. So my 4th game was against Andy, and Andy won that one. So by that point, by the 5th game, I was like, okay, if I'd beaten Andy, then, like, really seriously, it's on for the top spot. Played Ian. Ian had a really nice Chindik sort of Gurkha British Burma list. And I think I'd lost 5 dice by about the second dice of turn 2, because he had 2 British observers. And it wasn't so much that I placed my units badly. He'd placed them about 14 inches away from each other. They both came in at the start of turn 2, and he rolled a 10 and a 12. So they overlapped. So I just had this horrible zone of pins. And obviously, because they're all in consommelettes, they got pinned out. So I basically just did a flying V for the rest of the game, decided not to go down with any other units, not to do any escape moves, and just was like, have that. And, I was 5, 6. I think I was 6 dice down before I took one of his. And I'm like, this is such a long way back now. So I 1-2 drew 1, and then lost both the games on day 2. But, had a good time, good fun.
Yeah.
And yourself?
Oh, well, where did you end overall first, Phil?
Oh, 25th.
25th. So
Yeah.
midway.
Midway below. Yeah. I've always enjoyed Beachhead, and I've never sort of arrived at Beachhead going, I really want to win it. But I've always, as we know, I want to do as well as I can. And that game 4 against Andy was a big one. And that, Yeah, beating, well, yeah, beating Gary in game one was a big one as well, but it wasn't expecting it, if you like. Whereas
Yeah.
game four was like, right, if I win, this completely changes the complexion of game five because right up there towards the top and potentially pushing for a podium. I didn't, and then Ian did really well to get ahead on game five, and then I was like, let's just enjoy the next hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, rather than stressing about trying to claw my way back for a draw and see what falls out. So yeah, disappointed with 25th, but day one was great, and then it just kind of got away from me on day two.
Yeah, and that last game probably was like at least a 10 place tumble, as it were, if you know what I
Oh, it
mean.
was
Like,
huge. Yeah, it was
because you
huge.
go from sort of
Well,
top half of the table, like
yeah,
top quarter probably, to tumbling
Ian
down.
finished 11th, so he beat me and finished 11th. So if I'd won that, and I think I had a better overall because I had the draw and only one loss. Yeah, potentially could have been top 10, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Yourself?
Well, mission one, I played on the D-Day table, which is a nice looking table, but it's a quirky old table for playing on, because we were playing the land grab as well. So the seawall really, because it's directly in the middle of the table as well.
Mm-hmm.
Playing Matt GB, he had British appropriately, a lovely army. He had a machine gun team. He had two tanks, a Lee and a Stuart. They got pinned in prep and then reversed. Which is
Oh
quite funny.
no,
But
not
what
for
he did
him.
was he was super aggressive and rushed through the seawall.
Nice,
And then my reserves arrived, took
very
out like
nice.
one squad, and then the rest of his army decided the flames went for them and
It
sort
just
of
tumbled.
hid in the neutral zone. Meanwhile, I
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of bypassed them. So I got a win on that. Really good game, really nice opponent, and a nice army as well.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really nice game, that one. Game two was when I was playing against Simon
Mm-hmm.
Edwards.
Yeah.
He had Germans. That was an intimidating old force, actually. It wasn't particularly like spammy or anything, but he did have three armored vehicles he had a 259, he had a drilling, and he had a Puma,
Yeah.
which is a good counter to Comsomolette force.
Yeah.
But what I did was I target saturated up the flank, and we did have that thing where the flank was exposed, but equally the other alternative was lots of like I don't know what they were supposed to represent, but it was, doormats,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a desert table. So it wasn't
Oh, okay.
cornfields. So I'm not sure, some sort of crop fields, I guess, is what it's representing.
Yeah.
But it meant I'm not going that way. But the
No.
funny thing was, I didn't realize this DZE thing. I was playing V2 basically. So I
Yeah.
came on my long edge
And
and tried to
exited.
run off his.
Yeah.
And it was only turn four when I had the car park on the flank that
Yeah.
we realized, and then I just whizzed off. And so
Yeah.
in the end, I got probably four more dice off than him, I think, and that's just because of like weight of numbers.
Yeah.
There was a bit of fun using the mortars once you got within a minimum range. I then used them like American football, sort of like line defense, where I snapped them and then ran back to the back line so that it was more than 12 inches for like his mortar team to run off the table. Fun game, but I got the win again on that, which then set me on a collision course with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we've talked about it at length earlier in the
Yeah.
episode. A draw, kind of a rock meeting a hard thing
Yeah.
with even number of objectives. Um, I think that was going to be a draw. As soon as we rolled the six objectives, I think, unless one of us had done something like really out of left field, we
Yeah.
were going to draw, weren't
One
we?
one of us does something really inspired or really uninspired. But
Yeah,
as it was like, oh, we've got six objectives. You're going to do this. I'm going to try and get the fourth objective. Oh, I can't quite get there. Oh, just park the bus. Yeah.
yeah. And I found it really difficult being the person to play second because I am the person who'll risk it all
Yeah.
for the dice off, basically. And because I got I had to put my objectives down first. Sorry,
Yeah.
it meant I couldn't play that game against you. I couldn't
No.
just match your objectives or deliberately throw one in a weird place because you basically had control there. So it was a draw, and that put us in an interesting spot. Game four, where I played Matt Sparrow near the
Mhm.
top of the table, holding until relief. We talked about it earlier. I just rushed the middle.
Yeah.
Which then put me in a really strong position, but I knew I couldn't be first because
Yes.
I knew that both Topher and Bill hadn't lost a game.
Correct. Yeah.
I had a draw,
Yeah.
And so, on the assumption that one of them would win,
Yes.
a win wasn't enough for me to win the tournament.
Yeah.
And so, there was no real, like, ultimately, there's not a huge drive because if I win, I'm not coming first in the tournament.
But if you lose, you're going to tumble down. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. There's sort of like low, there's like high risk, low reward. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so that combined with what I was saying earlier, where I couldn't outflank, I couldn't advance up the table without allowing Andy to throw 8 dice hoping for a 6.
Yeah.
And then even once he did, is he then had loads of armor, which could then just like really bully my units. And so, unlike me ever, I played for the draw. I think it's one of the first times at a tournament that I've played for a draw. I don't think I've ever played for a draw really, but I just couldn't see. Like, I'm happy to risk it big if I
Mm.
can get the win, but I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
genuinely, because of that table and the mission and the fact that he happened to be playing Hungarians, one of the only
Yeah.
two players at the tournament to have Hungarians,
Yeah.
I just could not see a way for me to get the win. I thought even if I run across the table and start punching them point blank, best case scenario, I lose the same amount of dice that I take. And so we're heading for a draw, whether we're attack or not. So I thought, you know what, I'll just play it safe and have a safe draw, um, which didn't feel right, if I'm honest.
No. But in terms of where you finished in the table, it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Like yeah, it's not what I like to do. I don't like to play sort of like table tactical, if you know what I mean. I don't like
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
look at the table before game and decide what my outcome needs to be based on sort of maximizing my table position at the tournament. Because, like you said, Beachhead for me isn't. It's not WTC. It's not World Open War. It's sort of like I'm going for the fun of it. And yes, I want a top 10 ideally. But if I'm sort of like 15th, I don't really mind as long as I haven't done something really stupid that annoys me in the future.
Yeah.
And so playing for a draw just usually isn't in my wheelhouse for that reason. But as I say, I just couldn't see a way to win. So I thought, why not just have a really nice, relaxed last game? And we had a really nice game, to be fair. It was like really good
Mm.
because we weren't doing much else. So we had a nice opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah. 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 I mean, all five of my games were great. They're really good fun. And like no concerns there. I say that the game against Andy was brilliant. We've played each other a couple of times before. We know each other really well. And it was an absolute epic ding dong. Our game, I got a bit bored, is probably the right thing to say, around about like turn 4 or 5. I was like, oh, I know what you're going to do. And like, I was a bit tired and crabby by
Well,
the
it
end of the
felt
day.
like I was still playing for the win, but you decided, oh, this is definitely going to be a draw, is
Oh,
how
hell
it
yeah.
felt to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
And
I mean, that's what it was. Yeah.
because it felt like, and I think I had the same read where I was like, I don't see a way you can win this because you haven't outflanked, and I don't think you're going to get all the way across the table to me with your infantry. And so I don't see a way you can win, but I do see a way I can win.
Yeah.
And so I can kind of see that becoming a bit of like a kind of mission.
Yeah. 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 Cool. So overall, massive congratulations to Topher. So Topher won all 5 games and finished first. Second was Ben. Ben lost 1 game, which was against Topher. So Ben lost in round 2 to Topher, and then put in the 3 wins after that. Third was Bill Green, who also lost 1 game to Topher. So Topher had some really strong opponents as well. To be fair, you were fourth, which is great. Andy Tarrant was fifth. And then we had Rich C in sixth, Carrick in seventh, Doug in eighth, Stu in ninth, and Matt in 10th. So few names lower down. I know if you have watched the Bow and Alley episode, Russ and Gary, Paul Wickens, and so on, they were people that were mentioned who weren't in the top 10. But yeah, there's some new names in that top 10, but they're not a surprise. Ben's been playing very, very well for the last 9 months and is constantly appearing towards the top. I say I played Bill at Warfare, and Bill plays Finns all the time, so he knows how to play Finns very, very well, and he's a good, strong player. Andy, very good player. Recently moved over to Hungarians and a really, really strong list. Carrick's another person that has, his name's cropping up and we're aware of him. It was good to see Doug up there as well. Doug hasn't played a huge amount of V3, if much at all. Stu Hawkins is someone that we know well from the Welsh Open and Three Good Men, etc. And Matt's been having Matt's been playing for the last 12 months basically. Beachhead last year was his first event. Is again someone that we're seeing up there. So yeah, if there are names there that people don't recognise, they're known to people in the UK because we've been seeing them do well at events over the last 12 months or what have you.
Absolutely, yeah. And it is really interesting that sort of our unofficial rankings, the Bolt Action British Series, the Babs, our top two players on the series, Wickens and Morgan, yeah, you're right, 13th and 16th, I believe, from those two. And we're starting to see some new churn, like Ben flying up
Mm-hmm.
the rankings, both in this tournament and the overall rankings, because he's putting in the miles to go to all the tournaments, and it's
Yeah,
showing basically all that experience. Bill as well, like
yeah,
12-month turnaround. And
mm-hmm.
so we are starting to see some new names starting to creep up and be real competitors and sort of like ones to watch. So
Yeah,
that's quite nice, I think, to see.
yeah.
And it also, I think the other thing, my reflection from this was that I think the old list, if you're trying to play V2, basically,
Mm,
you're
mm-hmm,
starting to struggle. And I think
mm-hmm,
if you throw something left field out there,
mm,
the old hands, you might catch them off guard, basically. And so
mm-hmm,
some of the quirky lists, even if they're not like according to the internet and according to the competitive scene, including strong units,
mm,
they can still catch people out. And I think some of these lists we're seeing, there's weird, quirky things that people don't know how to counter yet, basically. And
yeah,
so it'll be interesting over the next 12 months to see how that settles.
yeah, agreed. Yeah.
There is one list that I do want to give a shout out to because he did get the wooden spoon, but he did take a Pershing. So, like, shout out to Robert Edgar because I think it's bringing a big tank like that to a tournament, knowing that it's not going to do particularly well.
Yeah.
I think it's really nice for your opponents. It might not be nice for you because you've set yourself up for a bit of a challenge, but I think every opponent who comes up against like a KV2 or like a Jumbo Sherman or some quirky tank they've not seen before, I think they always appreciate that as a really fun match. And so, like those players who are willing to do that, I think
Mm.
really do deserve credit for making the game more fun.
Yeah, Jason Cossey took a veteran Persian, and he finished 17th.
Really?
And and obviously he had to pad it out with some inexperienced units to kind of make the points work. But Jason effectively just stuck it in the middle of the table and went deal with that. Which is brilliant, and then used it as anti-infantry and hunt, because not a lot is going to touch it as a veteran Persian. So yeah,
That's, you see, I missed that entirely because he's still got 18 dice.
yeah.
And
So
so
there's a
he's done incredibly well to pad that list.
yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yep. So if you're still with us, it's been quite a long episode, this one. What's coming up? So we're going to be finishing off the Armies of series. So we've got, I think, four or five more PDFs to do. Obviously, we've got the Armies of US. So as soon as we can talk about it, we will be talking about it in detail. And then we've got some events coming up as well. So I've got at least three or four coming up in the next few months. Johnny, you got two or three or so?
I'm fancying roll call, Welsh Nationals, GT are the three that I haven't committed to yet,
Yeah.
but I'm penciled in.
Okay, so I've got Three Good Men next weekend. Dice over River Kwai with the South Wales Warlords in March, which means I've got an excuse to paint my LVTs and my Buffalo. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Nice.
And then roll call and Welsh Nationals. Yeah.
As ever, thank you for listening. If you still are, please do subscribe. We do appreciate it. Ta-ta for now.
And it's also ta-ta for now from me.